Hello folks, and welcome to another edition of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today I will have another program on the subject of my spiritual family. I have already discussed this before. In fact, I remember I gave had a discussion in which I gave some suggestions for how a person might even attempt to establish connections with their own spiritual family. In other words, people in the heavens, including in the next world, who may have a very close connection with one's own soul. In the Baha'i faith, that would include beings who are in the next world, especially souls that are in the Supreme Concourse, which is the highest realms in the next world, souls who are blessed with being divine angels, and as Baha'u'llah refers to them in at least a couple of places, as the leaven that leaveneth the world of being, that furnishes the power through which the arts and sciences are made manifest. Now, I don't know if all of these individuals that I will name are among those individuals, are among those special chosen souls, but I do know that they are special to me. There may be others as well who have a very close connection with me that I'm not aware of, or perhaps I know about them, but I don't realize the degree of connection that they have with me. Maybe I will in the future. The list of members of my spiritual family is growing all the time, or at least it has been so far. But basically what I will do today is go through this list of 23 people who are in my spiritual family, tell you a bit about each of them. In some cases I don't know much, and that'll become clear as I go through the list. And perhaps if you are thinking of coming up with a similar list of your spiritual family or community or whatever other name you wish to call it, that might give you some pointers. So let me go ahead and begin by just introducing these individuals and discussing who they are. Now, let me say first that I am not a Gnostic. In other words, I do not base my views on individual experience or knowledge. I believe that individual experience or knowledge is important, but I don't, as a Baha'i, ascribe any authority to it. Individual experiences are good, they're beneficial, they can enable us to have a clearer sense of our place in the world and in all the worlds of God, but our experiences are inevitably flawed because they're based on our own perceptions. They're not infallible, in other words. We are fallible beings. As Roy Bhaskar has said, there is a line which separates our own observations from reality. We observe reality through events, through the events that we see, through what we see happening around us. Because of that, our perceptions of reality are indirect. So therefore, anything that I may say about these individuals might very well be wrong. Now, these are the individuals. First, my mother. Her full name was Corinne Elaine Foster. Her maiden name was Corinne Elaine Kleinman. She is a blessed soul. She gave birth to me. She put up with my autism, with my father's autism, with the fact that my father and I, as two autistics, we ended up communicating past each other, never really effectively connecting when I was growing up. Later in life, my father and I became very close, but that certainly did not help my mother. My mother, as a result, was very stressed as I was growing up, and I remember that very much. She had a very difficult time in my childhood and youth because of that. It's not easy being a person living with two autistic people. Second, my father. My father, whose full name is Harold Lawrence Foster, originally Harold Lawrence Feigenbaum. Before I was born, my parents changed the family name from Feigenbaum to Foster because they thought that the word Feigenbaum would be a difficult name for me to have. It was a long name, difficult to spell, whatever. They decided to change it before I was born. I'm grateful for that. I think Foster in the United States is a much simpler, easier name than Feigenbaum. People have sometimes said to me, well, aren't you proud of your Jewish background? My response is, well, I certainly did not do anything to get my Jewish background, but yes, I am proud of my Jewish ancestry. However, if I want to talk about my Jewish name, that already exists. That's Moshe Aharon ben Herschel, my bar mitzvah name. So I already have a Jewish name. I don't need the Feigenbaum part. As I said, my father, like me, was an autistic. He was diagnosed at the very end of his life. He was a wonderful soul, very simple in terms of his communication ability, often would say the wrong things, not, I don't mean in a bad sense, but the words wouldn't come out right, which is a common autistic trait. You think one thing in your head, but the words don't come out exactly the way that you are thinking about them. He was a very rational person. He loved science fiction, just like I do. My father preferred reading science fiction novels. I, on the other hand, have liked science fiction movies and TV shows, but we had that in common. It was one of the few things we actually did have in common. We were, in many other respects, very, very different people. Being autistic does not mean, obviously, that you and the other autistic person are going to be identical or even similar. The next person is my maternal grandmother, whom I called Nanny. Her name was Frances Kleinman. Although later she got remarried when her husband died. I never actually met her original husband. He died before I was born. But when I knew her, she was Frances Libson, Libson. She was a dear, wonderful, loving soul, and still is. Very compassionate, a real grandmother. She suffered the end of her life with cancer. It spread all over her body and ended up killing her. It was a very difficult time, not only for her, but for my entire family. We would go by there every week and see her, and she was in bed, and she died when I was 12, which was back in 1968. Next is Rose Feigenbaum. I called her Grandma. Rose Feigenbaum was my paternal grandmother. I didn't know her as well, mainly because we didn't visit her as often as we visited my maternal grandmother. I always disliked that. I never really understood why we didn't visit her more. In fact, I still don't. I think that she was a wonderful person. I recall that she was always very happy when we would come by and pay her a visit. She was a very wonderful person. I can picture her apartment in Brooklyn. Morris Kleinman, my maternal grandfather, grandpa, died when I was just a couple of years old. I do remember him, although not very well, and so there really isn't much I can say about him. As I have been told, he had a fruit store, or a chain of fruit stores, struggled for much of his life, was never that successful economically. I believe it was only one fruit store. Then Sam Feigenbaum, he died before I was born. He was my paternal grandfather, so there isn't much I can say about him either, unfortunately. I never met him. Sam Libson was my step-maternal grandfather. I called him Papa. I loved him. Even after my maternal grandmother, Nanny, died, I still would occasionally call Papa up on the phone. As I recall, he ended up getting remarried. He was a very good soul, very patient, worked very hard, taking care of my grandmother under very, very difficult circumstances, and he was not young. It was not easy for him to do that. Elizabeth Thomas, my dear, beloved, spiritual mother. I love her. I love her. She is my heart. She gave me my spiritual life. I had no real spiritual life before Elizabeth. When I looked up Baha'i Faith in the phone book, at that time she was running the Baha'i information number in the area where I lived. We had just moved from New York City to suburban Long Island. She lived in Manhasset. She made arrangements for me to visit a Baha'i meeting, a fireside, the following day, and on that day I joined the Baha'i Faith. My first meeting. I then had constant relationships with Elizabeth. She was old enough to be my grandmother, so it was a motherly relationship that I had with her. She was married too. She was a very dear, close friend, and she put up with me and my autism before I even knew it was autism. For years, I would call her up sometimes several times a day. Her particular interests in the Baha'i faith were in reality, the nature of reality, and prophecy, especially biblical prophecy. And she would give talks on those subjects. She shared many of her ideas and her thoughts with me, and much of my original knowledge and much of my perspective on the Baha'i faith, which I have continued to this day, which has developed into the unities paradigm, or I should say the unicentric paradigm, unities of all things, is based upon those original conversations that I had with Elizabeth Thomas. When I think of her, I feel nothing but happiness. I feel her watching over me. Next is Hadrat Sultan Bahu. Hadrat Sultan Bahu was a 17th century Punjabi, lived in the Punjab area of what is now India and Pakistan. He was born on what is now the Indian side, died on what is now the Pakistani side. He was a Sunni Sufi Muslim, and a very wonderful soul, a brilliant poet, an extraordinarily prolific writer. And I have actually worked on some of his translations, some of which show up in a few of my books. Hadrat Sultan Bahu was opposed to the whole system in which a Sufi sheikh or leader would appoint a successor, and you would have a line or a path. Arabic word is tariqah. He didn't like that idea, so he died without appointing a successor, or a khalifa or successor. Now many people have claimed to succeed him, but he himself did not appoint anybody. After my father died, and I think that this was largely through my father's efforts, my father, I had a conversation with him, I remember, after my mother died. I said, "Dad, take my word for it. You will be with Mom when you die. Take my word for it." Soon after he died, I was drawn to the study of Sufism, and I have developed what is now the largest Sufi informational portal on the web. I will include a link to that below this program, as well as a link to a list of the individuals I'm discussing. In particular, I was drawn to Bahu. Bahu is a Persian and Arabic name that means with he. Ba is Persian for with, Hu is Arabic for he, with God. And Sultan Bahu would say, for example, Bahu is always steeped in the remembrance of Yahu, Yahu Arabic for O He, or O God. He was a true man of the heart, and I had no heart, in the sense of no empathy as an autistic. By turning to this man of the heart, I received a heart. for the first time in my life, I became an empathetic person. I could feel what other people felt. Not just sympathy, which is more of a rational or intellectual sensation. Empathy, emotional identification and feeling. Bahu, my guardian angel, I think, gave that to me. Bahu led me to a much deeper relationship with my Lord, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. I love Bahu. He is a wonderful soul, and I think he has been with me my entire life, including in a dream that I mentioned the other day, which, on thinking about it, the dream of the person who looked like a carnival barker, I now think that that most likely was a form taken by Sultan Bahu in the dream, how Bahu appeared to me on an alien planet, my universal or cosmic connections at the same time as my spiritual, angelic connections were being experienced. Next, Henry A. Weil. Henry was an author. I met him through Elizabeth Thomas. He wrote 2 major books, Drops of the Ocean and Deeper Than Your Life Vein. He also wrote a series of booklets called Wealth Without Gold. I have all of his material. What Henry was interested in doing was in understanding the soul and the mind and the spirit. He provided part of Elizabeth Thomas's perspective for her. Elizabeth used a lot of Henry's ideas and works, as do I. Henry was a wonderful soul. When I was the chairman of the Mississippi Baha'i District Teaching Committee back in the 1980s, I arranged for Henry to speak at our summer school. It was late in his life, and he was not as strong as I had seen him before, but he still did a very wonderful job. He was a great soul, a real pragmatist and realist, much like me in many respects, from St. Louis, actually not too far from where I am right now, about maybe 3.5 hours from where I live now, in suburban Kansas City on the Kansas side. Anyway, Henry was a wonderful soul. When I close my eyes, I can see him in a very, like blowing a kiss to me. That's the sensation I have when I see and think of Henry. Dear, wonderful Henry. Next, Marion Christ Lippitt. Marion was also one of the inspirations for Elizabeth Thomas as well as for me. I knew her. I didn't know her as well as Elizabeth, but I knew her. I had a letter correspondence with her for a bit. Met her face to face twice, as I recall. She developed an approach which she called the science of reality and the worlds of God. Again, my own unicentric paradigm is very much influenced by Marion Lippitt's work. There are some differences, but then again, whenever 2 different souls are thinking about something, their perspectives are not going to be identical. But still, much of the framework that she developed is what I have in the unicentric paradigm. I will also put a link to that below this program. Wonderful soul. And I know that she was very, very blessed, or I feel that she was very, very blessed. And I sense her presence around me. She's in my family. She's a member of my spiritual family. Next, and this is more speculative, obviously, an entity that I have already discussed on this show called Arrington, a possible extraterrestrial, or as I prefer, trans-terrestrial contact from the, it sounds kind of funny saying it, but the Zeta Reticuli star system within the southern constellation of Reticulum. Again, that is a sense I have that she is my trans-terrestrial angelic contact. I love her. I feel a deep sense of kinship with her on the level of a peer, in that, in the sense of soul to soul, a deep soul-based relationship with her, if she exists. So obviously I don't know, but if she exists, I do feel that very close relationship with her. Dave Phelos, a fellow that I knew for years and years. He was a good friend of mine. He died in a car accident. He was hit by a drunk driver. He was on his way to visit his aunt, who lived in Massachusetts, and a drunk driver hit him from the rear. As I understand it, surprisingly, the drunk driver survived, but Dave was killed. He was very young. I don't know how old he was at the time. I would guess younger than I am now, and I'm 57. I would guess he was maybe around 50 when he was killed. Very sad story. He loved jazz, loved Louis Armstrong. His aunt that he was visiting, his Aunt Jean, lived on the same block as Louis Armstrong and knew Louis Armstrong, knew Satchmo. She had an almost complete collection of his record albums, and Dave somehow got a hold of some of those from her. But just a very sad story, that the way in which Dave died. Imogene Hoag. Her full name was Henrietta Imogene Martin Hoag. Imogene was Marion Lippitt's teacher. Toward the end of Imogene's life, I never met her. She died a few years before I was born. But toward the end of her life, Marion Lippitt met her and got the basic idea for the worlds of God from Imogene. Imogene had put together an index of sorts called the Three Worlds. Three worlds being God, the prophets, and creation. And she wrote very elaborately about it. I will also put a link to that book below this program. And what Marion Lippitt did is she took that basic idea of three worlds and she expanded it into a very elaborate framework. But not much I can say about her. I know that she had a very close relationship with the Holy Family, the Baha'i the family of Baha'u'llah. I believe that she met Abdul Baha. I know that she had contact with Shoghi Effendi. Wonderful soul. Next is Hands of the Cause of God, Zekrullah Khadim. His first name, Zekrullah, translates from the Arabic as remembrance of God. Khadim is servant, and he really was a servant. He was a Hands of the Cause, one of those individuals who was named to that exalted rank by Shoghi Effendi. Extraordinarily humble soul. I met him on several occasions, had many long conversations with him, had an extended car ride with Elizabeth Thomas and Zekrullah Khadim, his wife Jabi Duke Khadim, from the Greenacre Baha'i School in Elliott, Maine, back to Long Island. So I got to know him fairly well. He lived in suburban Chicago, I believe in Skokie. Wonderful man of the heart. Deep, loving being. Had true spiritual connections with angels. Angels surrounded him on all sides. He was an angelic being. He was blessed, I think, by the presence of Baha'u'llah. He was blessed by Shoghi Effendi, whom he loved very deeply, and by Abdul Baha. Great soul. Anna Hall. Anna Hall was a fellow student of Marion Lippitt's ideas to me and Elizabeth. I loved Anna. She lived on Long Island at one point, later moved up to the Cape Cod area of Massachusetts. I went as a travel teacher once and gave a presentation there. I used to regularly go to Anna's home, to her Baha'i meetings, her firesides, and speak with her and share ideas with her. Just a very true woman of the heart. Woman of the heart. I was thinking about somebody else that I'll be talking about next. Very wonderful person. Dear soul. Really dear soul. Very sincere. Everything about her was sincerity. My Aunt Hannah. My Aunt Hannah, who was my maternal grandmother's sister, was a very wonderful person. Again, very humble person. When we lived in Bayside, Queens, in New York City, she would walk at least a mile, I think, when she was quite old, to visit us. I remember that my mother used to get so angry at her, why don't you call? We'll go by and pick you up. But actually, I think she enjoyed the walking. It was good exercise. But she was a very nice person. Very quiet woman. Never said very much, but just very heartful. She never needed to say anything. I looked at her and looked into her eyes. It was all love. She was a true loving being. I loved Aunt Hannah. Everyone should have an Aunt Hannah or someone like Aunt Hannah. Ruhia Macomb. Ruhia Macomb was an extraordinarily blessed woman. She told me that she met Abdul Baha at least 19 times. 19 times. at least, when she was about 8 years old. There are photographs of her with Abdu'l-Baha. She was born with the name, very poetic name, Musette Montana Jones. But Abdu'l-Baha renamed her Ruhiya, which is Arabic for spiritual. So she was Spiritual Jones. And when she got married, she became Ruhiya Macomb. Wonderful giggle. Story that she told was that Abdu'l-Baha once told her to have some rock candy, or gave her some rock candy, I believe, and said, if you have this rock candy, you will always have the giggles. And she did. Had a wonderful, natural giggle her whole life. Extraordinarily sweet person. A true woman of the heart. Beautiful soul. I used to see her all the time. She lived on Long Island, like I did then. Beautiful person. I look forward to seeing her in the next world. Don Kinney, or Donald Kinney. Don came from very illustrious parenthood. His father was Edward Kinney. His mother was Carrie Kinney. But both of them were named by Abdu'l-Baha. Edward became Safa, which is purity or serenity in Arabic, and Carrie became Wafa. Wafa is Persianized Arabic for faithfulness, loyalty, or certitude. They were pillars of the Baha'i faith in North America. Pillars of the Baha'i faith. Don does not remember meeting Abdu'l-Baha. He was a baby when Abdu'l-Baha was in North America in 1912. But he was in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. I was a 14, 15-year-old boy, and Don was, I'm guessing, in his 70s. But he would always come up to me. He would always treat me as an equal. Just strike up a conversation with me. Every single time I saw him, I always felt, what did I do to deserve this? In fact, I still feel that way. Extraordinarily generous person. I had and still have a tremendous affinity for the man. Beautiful person, wonderful soul. He lived in New Jersey, and every year there's a picnic just in the suburbs of New York City on the New Jersey side, where Abdu'l-Baha visited at this cabin, and I would go there and see Don every year. He was always there whenever I would go there. I was very sad to hear that he had passed, but now he is with other angels in the Supreme Concourse. So blessings to him, and I look forward also to seeing him. Ismail Siapush. Ismail was a wonderful soul. He was born the same year as my father, 1919. Died in 2010. Ismail is Arabized Hebrew for the Almighty God hears, and Siapush is Persian for covered or clad in black. Ishmael was a very soft-spoken man. I loved him. Felt very, very close to him. He would always walk up to me and have very loving conversations with me. Everyone liked Ishmael. His wife Faraday, also a wonderful soul. Ishmael was very, very dear to me, and I will see him eventually in the long scheme of things, not too long from now, really. Finally, Betty Bullock, Dr. Betty Bullock. She was one of my colleagues, a sociologist in the sociology department at Johnson County Community College. And Betty and I were not very close, to be honest. We were very different. Our personalities were different. I never disliked her. I don't think she disliked me. We just were very different. Betty was very interested in UFOs. Very interested. When she died of cancer a few years ago, I began to be interested again in extraterrestrials. And what I feel is that I got that interest from her. Now, of course, I don't know that. I am only surmising, but that's what it feels to me. That she transmitted that interest to me. And so I consider her as being a part of my family, as a member of my spiritual family. In reality, I think that we are all a part of each other's spiritual family in the great cosmic envelope of unity. All separations between people are imaginary. We are all one. We are all a part of the rational faculty, the attributes of the unity of humanity. We are all one. But there are certain special souls I think that each of us are drawn to. And those are the ones which, at least at this stage of my life, I feel that I have been, for whatever reason, drawn to. Until next time, this is Dr. Mark Foster. Have a good one.